Hello. In this episode, I want to talk about a case that inspired a short email that contains several important lessons in a few simple words. The patient was a 6-year-old neutered male Burnese Mountain Dog weighing 38.5 kilograms. We'll call him Ralph, though that's not his real name, and that is not his picture. That's a picture I pulled from the internet. I saw Ralph in the fall of 2019, and then in March of 2020, his referring veterinarian sent me an email containing the following paragraph. I saw Ralph today for his annual examination. Ralph is a happier and more active dog since the dentistry that you performed. They are amazed with your service and very pleased that Ralph is doing so much better. The owners were skeptical at first about doing the procedure because Ralph seemed fine. As a result, the owners seemed far more trusting of my recommendations. I see 4 messages in this short email that can be of benefit to veterinarians, pet owners, and ultimately to the pets that they love. The first lesson is certainly not exclusive to veterinary medicine or pet ownership, and it is simply that positive feedback is always appreciated. If we ignore the typographical error in this quote, I think we can all appreciate the sentiment, and I really appreciate that my colleague took time out of his busy day to send me that email message. So, to him, I say thank you very much. The second lesson is that, like their wild counterparts, pet animals are masters at masking their pain. If you go to my website, toothvet.ca, navigate to the Old Cusp Articles page, down to the bottom to the miscellaneous topics section, you'll find a paper entitled Dental Mythology. Read myth number 1, in which I talk about how pet animals don't exhibit pain in the way humans would, or in the way humans would expect their pets to behave when they're in pain. Lesson number 3 relates to the value of referring and is illustrated in the final line in the email, in which my colleague states, "The owners seem far more trusting of my recommendations." I talk about this in myth number 7 in that paper on dental mythology. When a veterinarian refers a patient to a specialist, they're sending their valued client 2 important messages. The first message is that the veterinarian's primary concern is not the generation of revenue, but the animal's well-being. The second message is that the veterinarian is acknowledging that he or she has limitations, knows what those limitations are, and will be honest with their clients when those limitations have been reached. Lesson number 4 is that subtle signs can often hide serious problems. The presenting complaint for Ralph was discoloration of his lower right canine tooth, seen here on the left of the image. Note how it's beige in color compared to the crowns of the lower incisor teeth and the lower left canine tooth, which is seen on the right of the image. Back to the Old Cusp Articles page, under the heading of endodontic disease, you'll find the paper on endodontic anatomy and physiology and another entitled endodontic diagnosis. And in reading these, you'll start to understand the significance of the discoloration of the crown of that lower canine tooth. Fortunately for Ralph and his owners, his primary care veterinarian was aware that when a tooth has a discolored crown, it almost always means that the pulp inside the tooth is dead, as I demonstrated in this paper published in the Journal of Veterinary Dentistry in March of 2001. Elsewhere in Ralph's mouth, there was some plaque and calculus buildup and a little bit of reversible gingivitis, but happily there was very little else going on in his mouth. We did do a thorough examination of all of his teeth and the entire oral cavity, including whole mouth intraoral dental radiographs. This is the radiograph of the right upper molars and some of the premolar teeth. So I turned my attention to the lower right canine tooth. In this preoperative radiograph, you can see that the pulp chamber in the right canine, which is on the left side of the image, is considerably smaller than in the left canine tooth on the right side of the image. Now, I'm confident you've already read the paper on endodontic anatomy and physiology, but just to review, when the teeth first erupt, they have all the enamel they'll ever have on the outside of the crown, but underneath that they have just a very thin dentin wall and a massive pulp chamber inside. And as long as the pulp tissue inside the tooth is alive, it's producing dentin, so that as time goes by, the pulp chamber gets smaller as the wall of the tooth gets thicker. These 3 radiographs were all taken of the same dog at different ages. On the left, 6 months of age. in the middle, 14 months of age, and on the right, 32 months of age. And you can clearly see how the pulp chamber in those lower canines got smaller over time. The color of the crown of Ralph's lower right canine tooth tells us that the pulp inside is almost certainly dead, and therefore has stopped producing dentin, whereas the live tooth on his left side should have continued to produce dentin. Logically then, we would expect that the pulp chamber in the dead tooth would be larger than in the live tooth, whereas in Ralph's case we have the paradox. The left tooth, the one on the right of the image, has a larger chamber than the dead tooth, the one on the left of the image. What that tells me is that whatever injury ultimately killed the pulp, before the pulp died, it was irritated enough to produce dentin at an accelerated rate. Therefore, the pulp chamber in the dead tooth on his right, left of the image, is smaller than in the living tooth on the right of the image, his left canine tooth. The key finding in my 2001 paper is that coronal discoloration is a very reliable indicator of pulp necrosis, even in the absence of radiographic evidence. This is because a dead tooth may discolor very quickly, but it may take several months for radiographic signs of endodontic disease to develop. In Ralph's case, we had not only the coronal discoloration, but also evidence of a chronic pulpitis leading to accelerated dentin production prior to pulp necrosis. Both were indicators that this tooth required either root canal treatment or extraction. Back to the old cusp articles page, you'll find a paper entitled "What is Root Canal Treatment?", in which I describe the process of performing that procedure, but also the pros and cons of root canal treatment versus extraction. Extracting the lower canine tooth in a large dog is a job that nobody relishes. It's a big job that creates a big wound that can then give us frustrations during healing. So if we have the option of performing root canal treatment instead, that is most definitely the way to go. Here is the post-operative radiograph showing the lower canine tooth after I've removed a bit of the crown to gain entry to the pulp chamber, removed all of the pulp and reshaped the canal, and then filled the tooth with dental materials, basically a rubberized material within the root and a solid plastic composite filling in the crown of the tooth. And here's the clinical appearance of the tooth following treatment. As I said, the crown has been shortened so that I could gain access into the pulp chamber, do the root canal treatment, and then put a composite restoration into the access hole. Of course, all of the teeth were scaled and polished above and below the gum line as well. And that's the story of Ralph, a big happy dog with a discolored tooth, a primary care veterinarian who knew the score, owners who were willing to go see a specialist, and in the end, a very positive outcome for all involved. I hope you found this presentation entertaining and informative, and I thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.